let's go into the discussion around the types of contracts. Our discussion of planning procurement is not complete if we don't talk about types of contracts. Okay. According to Pembroke Guide 6th edition, there are 3 different types of contracts. The first one is the FP, fixed price contract. The second is the CR, cost reimbursable contract. They also call it CP, cost plus contract. The third is T&M, time and material contracts. Let's go into all of these things one by one. Let's start with the FP, fixed price contract. In this kind of contract, a fixed amount of money is required to be paid by the buyer to the seller for a specified quantified amount of work. Okay. Fixed price. A fixed amount is to be paid by the buyer to the seller for work that they have both understood, quantified, have a full understanding of the scope, and then a price is given to it. This is the common, is the most common type of contract. Okay, you bring somebody in, I want you to do this for me. How much would you collect? Then the person quantifies the amount of work and says, okay, I'll collect X amount of money. So that's a fixed price contract. So the specified work, that is what the deliverable, could be the deliverables. It could be a service. It could be a result. Whatever has been defined in the contract, whatever both of them have been able to agree on to say, okay, I want you to render this service for me, or I want you to get these products for me. I want you to work on this deliverable for me. So whatever that is, that's what we mean by the specified work. So this kind of contract is also called lump sum contracts. Lump sum contracts. Okay? Now, what are the characteristics of this kind of contract? The first is that the scope of the work is well defined. It is going to be difficult for a seller to agree to a specified amount of money, except when the seller has a clear idea of the amount of work involved. So that is the reason why the scope of the work has to be well defined, because if it is not defined, it will be unwise for the seller to agree to a fixed amount of money for amount of work that he doesn't know. That would be unwise. That would be very unwise. Okay? Now, the buyer is legally bound to accept the contract deliverable in line with the agreed scope. Beautiful. This is telling us that as long as the seller provides the agreed service, provides the agreed product, provides the agreed deliverable, the buyer is legally bound to accept it. That is, according to the contract, if the seller plays his own role, does his own part, the buyer has to do, his own part by making payments. He has to accept. And this is one of the reasons why we keep emphasizing that your acceptance criteria has to be clear. That's why we keep emphasizing that you should not leave ambiguity in contract matters. Because if you leave ambiguity in contract matters, you are giving the buyer an opportunity to be able to reject your work, to be able to insist that you have not done it well, because you would think you've done it well. If the seller thinks you've not done it well, that definition, that word "done it well," how would you define it? Based on what metrics would you know whether somebody has done something well or not? So all these things should be well stated in the contract. Another characteristic of fixed price contracts is that the seller has to complete the agreed work. Very important and compulsory. As long as the contract has been signed, the seller is legally bound to do the deliverable, deliver on the contents or his own role as contained in the contract. Now, Another characteristic here is that the price is fixed. The buyer must pay the seller as long as the seller has delivered on his deliverables, and the seller has legal backing to fully claim the price. The sellers have full backing to claim their payments. Okay. Well, as much as we say the scope is clear, pricing is clear, that doesn't mean that change cannot happen. That doesn't mean that, there can't be any modification in the deliverables. But if this must happen, neither of the two parties can take unilateral decisions. Neither of the two parties can take unilateral decisions. Change in scope is usually allowed for both the buyer and the seller, but they have to renegotiate new terms. They have to renegotiate new terms. That is payments and related, conditions. Beautiful. In terms of risk, who has the higher threat level? Which of them has the highest threat level? Okay, between the buyer and the seller. If you look at it well, you understand that it is the seller has a higher threat level or higher risk. The buyer has the minimal risk in comparison to the seller. Why? Because the seller is agreeing to a fixed amount of money, irrespective of what happens in the course of creating the product, irrespective of what happens in the cost of rendering the service. It is not the business of the buyer anymore. You have been paid, go and deliver. That's the mantra. You have been paid, go and deliver. And something happened, and we had a problem in the office. All of those things, it's not the business of the buyer. As long as you have agreed on a particular amount, it's just the buyer having paid has fulfilled his own responsibility. The seller should fulfill their own responsibility regardless of whatever, So a fixed price contract should only be used when the seller is confident and aware, confident in the process it takes to complete the product or service. So it will be very risky for a seller to agree to a fixed price when the seller does not have the confidence that the product or service will be delivered at that price. And that is the reason why we regard the seller having the largest amount of risk, because the fixed price contract puts the most risk on the seller. Correct. There are three types of fixed price contracts. The first is FFP, firm fixed price. This is a fixed price is set for the seller to complete the contract scope. Unless there is a change in the scope, the seller is expected to complete the scope, as long as there is no change in the scope. As long as there is no amendment to the contract, whatever has been agreed upon should be done. Of course, definitely, even when there's an amendment in the contract, as long as they both agree it's to be done, it has to be done. So most of what we have been discussing before now is actually FFP, firm fixed price. So there are other variations of FFP, firm fixed price. The first one here is FPIF, fixed price incentive fee. What do we mean by FPIF? Okay, you have your normal fixed price and then you have an incentive on top of it. For example, the buyer would need to pay a fixed price for the completion of the project. Okay, normal fixed price is still there, and then on top of that there will now be an incentive if the buyer meets or exceeds some agreed performance metrics, For example, you bring in an artisan to work on, let's say, plumbing, and then you are saying the amount you would collect is $10,000. But if you can finish 1 week earlier, for every day you finish earlier, you earn $500. That's an example of FPIP, fixed price incentive fee. So that incentive could be in the form of, cost saving from the cost ceiling. What do we mean by cost ceiling is that maximum amount you want to spend on the project. So you want to reward the seller for conserving costs while also maintaining quality anyway. And then schedule issues. Maybe you want to reward the seller by finishing earlier, for example, or let's say performance, maybe in terms of speed, in terms of quality, in terms of many things, and then scope. So a lot of all these things could be the justification for you to want to give an incentive on top of the fixed price. Okay. Then you now have the FPEA, or it's also called FPEPA. That is, FPEA is fixed price with economic adjustment. FPEPA is fixed price, economic price adjustment. Okay, so this is a form of fixed price contract in which inflation and other economic factors are taken into account. This is usually taken into account when you have projects or contracts that span numerous years. And usually when you have numerous years, a lot of economic changes could happen in that time span. That is why when you have contracts that they enter into, let's say for example, big construction contracts or whatever kind of work, when you have it in such a case that this thing takes a long time, you usually factor in economic adjustments. So this type of contract offers more protection for cost increase on the seller side. I've had examples of organizations that had to run out of business. Look at the case of Etisalat in Nigeria, for example. They got loans in dollars, and then the economy got bad, and they had naira, they couldn't pay back the loan in dollars again because the rate of dollars that when they got the loan was significantly low. There had been so much of increase in the rate of dollar as that when they want to refund the loan. And well, to the best of my knowledge, that's what I understand. And that resulted in them not being able to pay the loan. They defaulted, and that led to a lot of issues for the company. So usually, in the case of a project now, one way in which the seller could use to protect the transaction from issues like this is to go into a kind of contract that inherently gives this protection from economic variations during the time of working on the project.